Hi, class. Hope you're doing well. Staying safe out there, washing your hands, practicing good social distancing. So, we're on to Chapter 8, The Art of the Etruscans. It's a fairly short chapter, not as much lecture. I have a introductory documentary from 2003 that I want you to watch. It's 25 minutes long. Give you some of the ideas of different areas and a bit of the history and language and things. We're going to go over the highlights of the chapter. Also, you need to be reading Chapter 8. And I'm going to post in the Chapter 8 module the study list, slide list, and vocab terms for Chapter 8 and 9. The next test will be on Chapters 8 and 9. So, the Etruscans lived in the northern half of Italy, and this area, Tuscany, takes its name from the Etruscans. They were the early kings that ruled the Romans, the early Romans, and they lived in this area. They taught the Romans about a lot of things, but later they were conquered by the Roman Empire and kind of incorporated into it. There's been some genetic study about some towns in this area and also the genetics of Italians, and they say that this area here is where the majority of them were, as well as being an indigenous culture to Italy. There's different theories, but the main one modern people believe is that they were indigenous to Italy and this northern area of Etruria. So they had a flourishing civilization between about 1000 and 100 BC, so almost 1,000 years, and they occupied this northern part of Italy even as the Roman Republic started to happen. But then around 300 BC, they started to be under political control and then fully of Rome, and then fully Romanized by about 200 years after that. They're contemporary, which means at the same time as Greek culture, and they're in the Iron Age. Some of their main cities that we would think of them would be Papillonia, Volterra, Tarquinia. We're going to look at some frescoes from here, a mirror from here. So these are some of their main areas. They taught the Romans about a lot of things. One of the things that they taught them about was engineering. They were highly skilled engineers in building drainage, irrigation, taking land that was swampy and making it usable, building complex systems of roads that the Romans learned a lot from them and maybe we could say even improved upon. They also took their ideas, the Romans took their ideas of the augury, which is the reading of the will of gods in animal entrails and the flight of birds. So the way birds fly, and also sacrificing animals and looking at their entrails. That was another area that they influenced the Romans in. They were like the early Greeks in that they formed never formed a single nation. They were city-states, and they coexisted with separate rulers. And unlike the Romans, they never exactly established an empire, but they were important in their own right as a culture in their relationship to Greece and Rome. They have elaborate burial objects and burials, and we'll look at some iron, bronze, and ivory objects that in the documentary that you had. So that'll be interesting to see, and we'll look at a few of them in this slideshow as well. In the 7th and 5th century, their heyday, BC, they controlled the Western Mediterranean, and they were an important trading nation. They had different types of crafts and goods that they made. It talks about them making alabaster and ironworks in the video, and those were very important. We know that they had trade routes in the Aegean, North Africa, and the Near East, and we know about the style from their pottery examples. Their language is particularly interesting. Its origin is unknown because of different theories by Greeks about them coming from Lydia, but most people, like the main theory, other theory is that they're from northern Italy, indigenous, that most people agree on. But their language is written right to left, not left to right, so it has an uncertain origin because they don't know. It's an adapted Greek alphabet for their language. They had, according to Roman sources and historians, a really rich literature, and all of it is lost, so we're going off their ideas of it. And then writing survives on graves and religious texts, and only a few words are decipherable, so not a lot of extra information given to us about them from their writing, which, as we've talked about many times in the course, is kind of a difficult thing to have to deal with. So I want you to definitely watch that documentary because it'll talk to you more about some of these type of things that are interesting and show you a few of the places. A place we're going to look at is called the Tomb of the Augurs, because one of the figures was mistakenly thought to be an augur, which is, as I just said, augury being the reading of the will of the gods and birds and animal entrails. So an augur was a priest who read the signs of those things, the flight of birds. And so one of the people in this was thought to be an augur, so they called it the Tomb of the Augurs, but it's not actually. There isn't an augur here. This is a better picture of it. Mourners at the door of the other world. Their necropolises, which we should remember from chapter 5, are their cities of the dead. In the ancient Egyptian world, we called necropolises Necropolis, like a city of the dead, are a major source of information about them. They're mostly carved out of rocky grounds and this volcanic rock called tufa, and they were left by the Romans. They weren't disturbed, so they were left like that. They have inside of here a tomb painting that's a fresco, which, if you remember, it's been damaged a bit. If you remember from our other conversations, frescoes are painted directly into wet plaster. It kind of has a little bit of a disregard for naturalistic movement and anatomical accuracy. There's some level of feeling of people, but it's not like we're looking at it with ancient Greece. And if you see, it looks like they're kind of standing on a balancing beam, like a thin shelf. Stylized body gestures are going on here. And there's something really strange here with this way they're putting their hands on their heads and their arms out. It's some kind of either mourning or thought to be like mourning or reverence for this tomb to the other world. In their fresco paintings, they use some of the conventions of the Minoans and Greeks, like women with lighter skin tones. And this has a lot of symbolism in it. The underworld or the afterlife here. So they had some kind of door that led to it. They believed in it. Their ideas are probably more like Egyptian ideas about the afterlife than the Greeks. They used to bury people with items. And then this is kind of like meant to be a solemn mood with the clothes being dark purples and reds. There's a gesture of mourning. Like I said, this is a mourning gesture. And after this, later on, these tombs, they used to cremate their dead. There's a number of funerary urns, so like pottery pieces that have the ashes inside there. And a lot of them have the idea of doors and houses of the dead reflected in them. So we know there's some type of symbolism here that's common. A lot of colorful painting, really, for a funeral type thing. There's the idea of life with plant vegetation and things like that. And we have some kind of animals that are not showing as well up here. A lot more simplistic than some of the things we've seen in ancient Greece. More like Minoan and Egyptian in their simplicity. I want to say this is, a bigger scene that we don't have a lot of detail in, but this is the main image that I want you to be able to recognize. There's also, we found some different terracotta sculptures. Not a lot of buildings remaining. There's some like different foundation structures and things in different spots, but the materials they used were not as permanent. They would have used a lot of wood, tufa, which is a soft, porous volcanic rock, and there's some remains of fortifications and a little bit of understanding of that they had urban organization, but with gridded streets. And then this reconstruction is based on a description by Vitruvius. So it would have been a temple. You can see it had a porch at the front with columns. Kind of feel more like Minoan columns a little bit, but sort of Greek influence too. There's that gabled roof. And we're going to look at a statue that would have been on the roof here, made out of terracotta, which is, as we know, this word terracotta means cooked earth. Vitruvius, who described this, was a Roman architect and engineer from the Augustan period, so he saw it. That was a religious temple, and it was made out of wattle and daub for the superstructure. So wattle is branches that are reinforcing the daub, which is clay like rebar and concrete. There was a stone podium that it would have had, and a tile roof, baked tile, terracotta tile, and then the earthen sculptures on top. You could see that their style was influenced by Greek archaic. It stayed a little longer here, and it had floor plans similar to Greek temples. We know this because of the foundation of some of the original remains. They favored an entrance, like a clear front, not a back and a front porch like the Greeks had. And there's no colonnade, there's just an entrance porch. It has a heavier, more massive quality than the Greek style that feels like it lifts up a bit more. Okay, so this is from the temple roof of one of four. They had similar pantheon of gods. We have Apollo here, who is a Greek god as well, as the Greeks and the later Romans. Example would be like in Greek, there was Zeus. In Roman, there was Jupiter, and in Etruscan, it would be Tinia, Tinia, so the same type of god, Zeus and Jupiter, as Romans. So they have the same pantheon, pretty much. It would have been painted, a cooked earth statue out of clay. They really favored using terracotta, baking the clay as their material. So they would have modeled it while the clay was wet. And then you see its hollow doesn't blow up in the kiln when they fire it. And this big column here is to help support it because this would have been loose. Clay is interesting. It's all disparate pieces of material, and then when you fire it, it becomes a solid ceramic piece. All the particles get tighter and stronger together. It had a lot of details that would have been done in the post-firing. So like after they fired it, some of the really smallest details would have been. Those are like life-size, 5'10". And you could kind of see comparing it to Kyros Boy, the archaic Greek, and this would have been like an archaic era for the Etruscans. Not stone though, it's clay. I have the similar forward or energetic forward stride like we had in Kyros Boy. He's clothed, he's not nude, so there's not that idealization in the sense of the body nude, but there's still very much an ideal getting shown here. Similar even hair with the braiding type of feeling to it, and the zigzagging on the fabric is very geometric. There's some organic form to the chest and things, but there's definitely a lot of stylization happening here. Diagonal kind of calf muscles, this is zigzagging. There's a smile, sort of like this guy didn't have a smile, but we talked about the archaic smile. There's a bit of that. And the hair and locks are geometric as well. Maybe the work of Volca of Veii. They're not sure, but that could be the artist. There's definitely a parallel, though, when we look at the Greek and the Etruscan art development, like the archaic, classical, and Hellenistic has a kind of relationship to the Etruscans had. This would be like their archaic era. Date's not exactly the same. Apollo Veii made later than the Greek archaic style, so that's something. This is an important piece for the Romans as well as the Etruscans. It's called she-wolf or Capitoline wolf because it's later found on the Capitoline Hill of Rome. It's made out of bronze, hollow cast, 500 BC. She's supposed to be a protective guardian statue. She was